Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we'll get started. It's my pleasure to welcome you and guest speakers from both sides of the fence, the inaugural event of the University of Melbourne Republic Club. The Australian Republic is arguably one of the most important objectives for Australian politics from the perspective of history, national identity and our international image, whichever side you favour. It's a matter which I believe does not merely belong to the agenda of progressive politics, but can and should transcend the customary political divides. Sadly, the cause of an Australian Republic has slept in the political consciousness of Australians since the heady days of the 1990s, when my grandfather would take me to a Monarchist rally on a Friday and my father to a Republican one on a Saturday. During the course of which, only 5 years old, I or my father procured for me the autographs of both Paul Keating and Geoff Gallop. I lacked the prescience at the time to procure that of Malcolm Turnbull to complete the set. Now, in the intervening years, what with wars on terror and global financial crises, Australians have perhaps understandably felt that there have been more important things to worry about. Between strapping young princes, glamorous and supposedly middle-class royal brides, and cherub-like royal babies, the monarchy has become considerably more attractive to many Australians than it was when Prince Charles was the glamorous young face of the royal family, committing inexplicable adultery against the people's princess, and wild rumours abounded of a plot behind Diana's murder in which the Duke of Edinburgh loomed conspicuously in the tabloid imagination. But there is more to the cause of an Australian Republic than the popular favourability of individual royals. The celebrity status and charm of the youngest reign of Windsors should not play too large a factor in discussions around our constitutional arrangements, nor should a narrow utilitarianism lead us to suppress or renew debate on our constitution in favour of those glorious maxims of jobs, growth and budget surpluses. Now, for this reason, this new club has been formed at the university to renew interest in the Republic amongst the generation that, according to a recent Fairfax article, is arguably too enamoured of Her Madge and the lot out of Buckingham. So I would encourage you all to join the club afterwards and we'll get the debate underway. We'll start with a coin toss. Shall I get who wants to call?
David, you can call.
Heads.
Heads it is.
Should we like to receive? Should we vote to receive? Yes.
Lovely. So I'll begin.
Let's begin. Excellent. So tonight's public debate will give you the chance to hear from some very well-placed students, academics, politicians and activists who I will introduce as they come up to speak. They will argue passionately and persuasively on the virtues of an Australian Republic and a constitutional monarchy, and perhaps help you to make up your minds on the matter if you have not already done so. The final adjudication will be made by the audience via a show of hands, and there'll be a chance for Q&A afterwards, followed by some white snacks. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker on the side of the Australian Republic, our inaugural club president, Victorian youth convener of the ARM, debater extraordinaire and editor-in-chief, I believe, of the Melbourne Globalists, Mr. Jacob Rodrigo.
Good evening or good afternoon, Professor Gallop, Professors Flint and Burnard, Associate Professor Scalmer, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure this evening to begin the case for the benefits of Australia becoming a republic. And before I begin in earnest, allow me to make one thing absolutely clear. I don't hate the Queen. You know, I don't hate the royal family, I don't hate corgis, beef eaters, or excessive gaudy bling. Rather, I'm actually fond of the old bird, along with the Westminster democracy, the common law system, Doctor Who, Range Rovers, and the eternally versatile English muffin. What I and this side of the House stand utterly against, however, is that someone by birth, class, privilege, or race has the divine right to rule our country, Australia, especially when that person is not a citizen of this country, especially when this nation that so prizes the fair go, egalitarianism and humility, especially when no child born in this nation can ascend to its highest office, especially when we live in a post-colonial world and Europe is farther away than it ever has been. This side of the House stands to get rid of something old and irrelevant. We stand to create something new and vital. We stand for an Australia that's ready to leave its parents' house, to step out into the world free, independent and proud, and potentially with a bad haircut as well. We believe that in doing so, this nation will benefit immensely. To prove these points today, I will be speaking on the economic benefits of becoming a republic. My second speaker, Associate Professor Scalmer, will be speaking on the benefits to democracy that such a change would bring. And my final speaker from WA Premier and current chair of the Australian Republican Movement, Professor Geoff Gallop, will speak on the symbolic and cultural boons of seizing our nationhood. Now, in regards to a question no doubt the opposition will raise of which model of the Republic we favour, my answer is this: any. The benefits we speak of today will be equally relevant to any model, from minimalist to direct electionist, presidential, and we stand in favour of the benefits of them all, and we'll be speaking of the universal benefits of any of the models, no matter the personal preference of each speaker and of all you here present. Now, I was going to have some rebuttal of the opposition here, but sadly enough, the Queen got them the first speaker. So what I will do is allow her to be the first speaker. So I'll talk to my substantive points, which I will divide into two key categories. Firstly, the economic benefits of becoming a republic in regards to Asia. And secondly, the benefits that will come from the removal of the monarchy, and namely its hidden costs to Australia. So allow me to begin with my first point on the economic benefits to Australia of becoming a republic. The days of imperial preference are long gone. When Australia was founded, our ties to the empire were an immense economic boom. Our trade with countries in the British Empire and the Commonwealth later was protected in a manner that gave this nation a shielded, profitable and rich market in which to sell our pristine natural resources and products. However, these days the United Kingdom seems more interested in the European Union, and such benefits for Australia are nil, essentially. A point most simply illustrated in the fact that any Australian citizen arriving to the UK, as I did nearly a few months ago, lines up not in a preferential line, rather you stand in the line of anyone else, and the European Union citizens get to come through. That metaphor stands for our trade. These days, we gain no benefit from being a monarchy from our trade with the United Kingdom. In fact, not only is it no longer a benefit to us, it's now an active detriment, and I'll focus on Asia to prove that point. The 21st century is the Asian century. We've been told this numerous times by politicians and economists. What does the Asian century mean for us in a monarchy? In the Asian century, Australia remains constitutionally bound to the United Kingdom with a Queen in the United Kingdom who is the Queen of Australia. What message does this send to our Asian trade partners? The message it sends to our Republican, communist, and occasionally mildly dictatorial neighbours is that our country still looks to the west. We do not look east. And we are not truly committed to Asia and the trade that it offers. We're currently working through a free trade agreement with China, which is arguably not going that well. If we had changed the way our country works, would the outcome have changed? If we had negotiated and considered with them not as a monarchy bound by the media liaison, $80,000 on meals and rooms, $60,000 on hospitality and events, which somehow manages to differ from meals and rooms somehow. But these aren't the costs that I'm worried about. The costs are the hidden costs of the monarchy in this trip. A freedom of information request about the security costs of William and Kate's trip was rejected. What was the cost for our nation of securing these two people for their trip here for that duration? And if it was hidden from us by the government under that freedom of information request, isn't it natural to assume that the cost was staggering? So why then would changing to being a republic change that? Would it remove that cost? Surely they might visit. The question then is, surely the cost of a president would be around the same cost. I would argue not, and I'll divide it up into two different categories. Under the minimalist model, the cost to us of securing a president would be no more than the cost of securing the Governor-General currently. They would essentially function under the same role, and therefore we'd gain a net economic benefit of not securing William and Kate on every trip that they make down to the colonies, and we'd be able to make some money there. If we had a strong presidential power, you might say, well, wouldn't it cost us in protecting that person a la Obama? However, I would raise the point of the economies of scale. If that person is around all the time, the cost of maintaining their defence is significantly less than upswelling our skills and our security for a single visit, and existing economies would be able to meet that and be more consistent over time and therefore cost less. So these hidden costs don't just stop there. What about the baubles we send to the Queen whenever she says something our way? What about the presents that we give? What about the things that we send? What about signed cricket bats that end up there all the time and seem to be chartered over in RAF jets at a cost of $200,000? These myriad costs would, in many cases, be reduced and allow our republic to save money. So, ladies and gentlemen, not just for the symbolic and democratic benefits to Australia, but for hard-line economic benefits does this side recommend a republic and would see it as highly beneficial. Thank you.
The Monarchists is Daniel Golden, a law student and another of Melbourne University's principal debaters. Daniel has represented and debated at home and abroad, and will now use a considerable talent to defend the cause of the crown.
Jacob just took there was one of pragmatism over principle. It would attempt to charge us on this side of the house as a side that stands for tie, tradition and loyalty to the crown above all else. Well, let me just reveal something that's going to assuage you of any of that notion. My mother's primary language was Croatian, and you'll never see a Jakulovic in the House of Lords. My father is an Irish Catholic, and you can remember what that particular demographic's opinion on the government from Westminster has traditionally been. I'm not a monarchist because I owe some genetic loyalty to the cause of the crown, but rather for reasons like Jacob, I believe that it is the best system of government that we have been endowed with, that we can be endowed with, and that it has delivered us concrete benefits and will continue to do so into the future. So what will I do in my material? I'll talk about why the system is legally and practically the most functional that we can be given. And I'm going to expand later on into what it means in terms of our identity and the economic benefits that flow from that. Before I do so, rebuttal directly of Jacob's material. One of us had to have this particular privilege. The first is with regards to his points on engagement with Asia. And these I would refute on their face. He asks the question, as so many Republicans do, what do foreign countries think of the fact that we are still affiliated with the Crown? And the answer is overwhelmingly, for the most part, it is highly respected and valuable. When Victorian Senior Council were recently given the chance to discard Senior Council and revert back to Queen's Council, they have overwhelmingly done so. Why? Because in the international arena, it makes them stand apart. It gives them a prestige and a connection to an institution with far more history and one to which Americans and lawyers from throughout the region can never quite aspire. Secondly, I would submit that link, however tenuous it may be, back to Europe, back to the Crown, back to our Anglophile roots, still gives us more bargaining power and a greater position in Asia. Thirdly, I would stress that most of the Asian powers are themselves monarchies. When we're talking about Japan, which is still an extremely significant partner for us in terms of trade. When we're talking about Thailand, for example, there's a great value in that connection. But my final point is this. If Jacob says that in order to appease China, in order to trade with a party which practices a dictatorial rule, which has suppressed democratic protests, which drove people off with machine gun fire, which continues to abuse the labour and rights of its populace, which has controlled the reproductive rights of women, and continues to dictate policy from a single presidium of political princelings, then no, we shouldn't debase our history and our culture in order to appease such people. That would be the greatest act of national cowardice, and I do not stand for it. Secondly, does it cost us at home and abroad? It's convenient for us because a lot of our political system at the absolute apex is paid for the British under this model. It's very convenient. Westminster pays for a lot of the costs, and the monarchy is largely self-funding. Are there security costs involved with getting them over here occasionally? Yes, but there'd be security costs identically if they came over as representatives as the head of state of the United Kingdom as foreign dignitaries. There are equal costs when representatives from Japan and Asian countries, when Obama comes over, when we hold the G8. The fact is these individuals will be dignitaries whether or not they are indeed representatives of the Crown and what that relationship means with Australia. So you have to rule that out as any sort of cost. What we do benefit from is the link and the tourism and the benefits that is sort of given us. But furthermore, the great charitable works that the Royal House of Windsor have continuously practiced throughout Australia, which far outweigh and run into the billions of dollars, far beyond the 500,000 that Jacob was able to quote. Finally, the big point, privilege and democracy. I am a Democrat. I do believe that people have the right to select their own governments. But the stance I take is that people should equally, and when exercising their democratic right, choose to opt for a system whereby the selection is hereditary in the hands of the House of Windsor. That is in and of itself an exercise of democratic power, and I see it as entirely legitimate. Why do I do so? The first point of material I want to bring you on this is the value and the robustness of the system itself. I would submit that any legal political system you submit can be judged in three ways. Firstly, how does it respond when everything is easy? How does it respond when everything breaks down? And who holds power in different situations? How does our system look relative to other systems? And you'll notice that Jacob was happy to stand for any system because their arguments are convenient. They can simply attack the present system. The fact is that the arguments against each model of republic are very diverse, and Jacob knows full well I can't attack each of them in turn, but I'll try and cover as many as I can. When a system is going well under the status quo, Australia benefits greatly from having the executive and lawmaking power drawn directly from the legislature. We get things through in a way that the American presidential system or the French presidential system never do, because there is no third tier of an executive which has a veto power over the House. You always have a guarantee of a functioning government. We have the advantage when everything is going well. But what about when things get difficult? In the United States, you recently had the fiscal cliff debates, and you've had debates like that many times before. When you have a powerful executive with political mandate, the ability to block laws or call elections, you have a recipe for stagnation, you have a recipe for stalemate. And in America and in countries like that, there is no mechanism to break those stalemates. Australia's also been in a situation like that before, when the government of the day discarded convention and decided that even though it couldn't get supply through the Senate, for example, that they would continue to persevere nonetheless. In our system, the umpire, the vice-regal, the Crown, steps into the equation and through the decision back to the people. We weren't stuck in any potentially apocalyptic negotiation. We went to an election because there was an umpire outside of the situation prepared to call for one. So who's left holding the power, and why is that important in that particular situation? Because the fact remains that on every day, our governance is handled by people that we elect. We elect the government of the day, and the policies broadly reflect that. But behind it all, there is a separate role, not a political role, but an umpire role. A person whose job is to be the guardian of the continued functionality of the system, to ensure that convention is obeyed and the government continues to function. And in that role, you want a fundamentally different personality. You don't want someone who's won an election. You don't want someone who lusts for power. You don't want someone who seeks power for power's sake. Rather, you benefit greatly from selecting some of the most respected individuals that Australia has ever seen for vice-regal roles, is often selected. And beyond that, a person who's literally been raised from birth to understand the responsibility of her office, to protect it and to maintain her neutrality. A neutrality that she maintained even when Scotland threatened to break away, a neutrality that would strip her of some of her powers. Ultimately, the individuals who should hold that ultimate check and power must be someone who has not sorted out. And for that reason, we benefit from that check under the status quo. I'm going to skip forward and cut through to what this means in terms of identity, because this is the one where we usually get hammered. This is Jacob's idealistic material about what it means to be Australian and how we can step out prouder without this. And I want to go back to my grandfather briefly in talking about it. When he was 17 and a half, he was commissioned as the youngest officer in the Royal Australian Navy at that time. He would go on to serve in the Navy for decades, and eventually the costs of that, like for so many others, meant that he would never be able to meet his grandson. He was, as I said, an Irish Catholic, but he sailed on a ship which I think illustrates the very principle I'm trying to describe. It bore the letters HMAS, Her Majesty's Australian Ship. Not HMS, not AMS, but HMAS. It infused the tradition of patriotism and the belief that one can be a proud Australian with a continued connection to a history which will be with us whether we become a republic or not. In recalling that history, he identified that it is not antithetical to be both a proud Australian standing out, proudly against the Japanese or whatever threat may come against us in the future, be that global warming, be that shifting geopolitical circumstances. But rather, there is a tradition and a history there that has been forged together, no matter your ethnicity, no matter your religion, by 100 years of strife, of struggle, and of sacrifice. People throughout history, people in this country, have been proud to recognise that we do have our own unique status, we do have our own unique history. And one of the great benefits we have gained from that is our unique political system, which properly envisages and fuses together those diverse roots, that diverse history. I want to close by saying one more thing. I promised myself that I would never come up here and say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the fact is, in the grand scheme of things, just like advanced countries in Scandinavia, where Norway is ruled by king, where Sweden is ruled by king, and both of them happen to be Germans, we've got it lucky. We're advanced, we're socially progressive, we are wealthy, we're successful. And when you flop a 20 in blackjack, you don't hit and hope for 21. Thank you.
The Republic is Associate Professor Sean Scalmer. Sean teaches in the History and Politics departments here at Melbourne University. His work and his research reflected enthusiasm for radical republicanism, covering post-colonial independence movements and the contribution of Mahatma Gandhi, the Australian Labour movement, imperialism, and the development of democracy and political radicalism in colonial Australia. Please welcome Sean.
Well, men and women of Australia, or should I say fellow subjects of the Queen, I'm delighted to join with you in debating the question whether or not becoming a republic would be beneficial to Australia. I want to argue that yes, it would be highly beneficial to Australia. We've already heard that there are economic arguments for Australia becoming a republic. We'll hear later on from my comrade Geoff Gallop why there are good cultural reasons. I want to focus on the political case as to why Australia should move to becoming a republic. And I'm going to rebut Daniel's arguments as my own argument unfolds rather than right at the start of my own contribution. I'm doing that mainly because, unlike the other speakers, I'm not an experienced debater. I'm a script-bound lecturer because Daniel talked about his background. My background's out of state school system of Western Sydney where we didn't have debating, so I'm going to have to do the best that I can. I think that my case is strong. There are three reasons why becoming an Australian republic would be politically preferable to our current arrangements of a constitutional monarchy. First, the current arrangements diverge from democratic principle. Second, I think the passage to a republic, the process of becoming a republic, would revive democratic debate and would enhance democratic engagement among Australians. Third, I think the current arrangements actually jeopardise the order and stability of Australian democracy. So let me, in the time that I have, take up each of these arguments in turn. First, the current arrangements diverge from democratic principle. Democracy, in Abraham Lincoln's Act formulation, is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Democratic politics rest on at least three key principles. First, equality. It's government by the people, in which no one is held above their fellow citizens. Second principle is the principle of participation. Because it's government by the people, all of us are involved in ruling ourselves. Third, there's a principle of openness. In order for us to rule ourselves, we need information on key public issues. And I think the current arrangement, the current constitutional monarchy, defies each of those three principles. First of all, it defies the principle of equality. The head of state, the monarch, is invested with a privileged status which is higher than the rest of us. They're raised above the common citizenry. Because an individual happens to be born into a particular family, they're granted a position that is higher than the rest of us. So in its essentials, this is a system which is based on hierarchy rather than equality. Second, participation. We cannot participate directly in the selection of our monarch or in the selection of the monarch's representatives in Australia. So that principle is denied. Third, the precise relationship between our monarch and the viceregal representatives, the relationship between each of them and our elected representatives, is in some senses hidden from public view. We don't know exactly what they advise each other about. We don't know about their exchanges. That whole realm of political discussion is hidden from the public. So for those three reasons, Australia is, if you like, an incomplete or imperfect democracy. We would move closer to being a more democratic society if we embraced a republic and moved away from a constitutional monarchy. That's my first reason. My second reason relates to the idea of moving to a republic. I think the passage to a republic, the process of becoming a republic, would revive democratic debate and would renew engagement with Australian politics. If we survey Australian politics today, what we see is widespread disaffection from the system. We see major political leaders with abysmally low approval ratings. We know that very few Australians join political parties. Around 2 or 3% of us decide to join. We know that although once political parties were the object of mass enthusiasm and even adoration, now our sense of identification with the major parties has fallen greatly. We know that for many people the decision to vote is really taken out of a kind of a sullen necessity rather than a genuine hope this might lead to something new and better. Now this is obviously a huge problem for Australian democracy, and I think the process of moving to a republic would help to address this problem. Any movement to a republic would generate widespread debate. It would demonstrate that political involvement need not be limited to factionalism and the careerism of many involved in official politics. It would signal that political debate could be a noble rather than a grubby pursuit. How do I know that this is likely to happen? Because history tells us. We know that the movement for federation in the 1890s succeeded a moment of economic crisis and of great disaffection from the political system with a series of corruption scandals that involved the leading political players. The movement for federation showed that politics might be about more than those issues. It galvanised widespread enthusiasm and democratic hope, and that sense of an Australian democratic experiment carried through into the early years of the Australian Commonwealth. I think the same process is likely to happen if we move towards becoming a republic. In deciding to move to a republic, then we need to debate a number of important issues. We need to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of our political system, the nature of our political involvement. We need to debate and understand exactly what democracy is. And I think that process would likely engage our enthusiasm and lead to a better and more democratic society. The third point that I have relates to the question of political order and stability. I want to suggest that the current arrangements actually jeopardise the order and the stability of the Australian political system. Democracies by their nature are characterised by contest and conflict. In consequence, a thriving democracy needs to find a way of managing that conflict and of containing it. If we look over Australian democracy in the 20th century, we find that there are two major moments of crisis. The first of those in the Depression, the second of those in the middle 1970s. In both of those moments, radical Labor governments were dismissed by vice-regal representatives after strong political crises. Now, in both of those cases, the vice-regal interventions did not solve the crisis, they actually deepened the crisis. Rather than there being disputes about particular policies or between particular parties, the disputes began to engulf the question of the Constitution itself. They overspilled the boundaries of partisan politics to become major issues about faith in the political system. Now, those crises were averted, but they were averted principally because of the restraint and the control and the respect for constitutional norms among Labor's leaders, not because of the design of a constitutional monarchy. So in a sense, we have still a ticking time bomb within our political order, and there's no reason to think that in the next political crisis that will undoubtedly become, it will be diffused in the way that it has in the past. So, there are three good reasons why becoming a republic would enhance our democracy. It would ensure that our system respects democratic principle, it would revive democratic debate, and it would ensure democratic order and stability. Thank you.
Oh yeah, our second speaker for the monarchy shall be Professor Trevor Burnard. Trevor is head of the School of Historical and Philosophical Studies here at Melbourne. He's taught history in most of Her Majesty's realms, I believe. He's the historian of the first British Empire of the 18th century, the Atlantic world of the Caribbean and the American colonies, in which the British first cut their colonialists' teeth before casting those proverbially perfidious eyes upon the Antipodes. Please welcome him as he sheds some historical light on the future of the British Empire in the 21st century. Thank you,
thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to talk to you tonight on this particular site. I'm very curious. I'm puzzled why I was invited. It's a matter of profound indifference to me, whether we had a monarchy or not. I wasn't in Australia in 1975 with the crisis, and I wasn't here in 1999 when, as in Scotland recently, the voices of the silent majority drowned out the voices of those wanting to have some change. And if there is another vote on retaining the monarchy, I won't even get a vote because I'm a New Zealander, so I'm in constitutional limbo. But I guess two of the reasons I've been invited here is firstly that I do, as Joseph pointed out, run a subject on the Age of Empires, which has one of its principles that most societies at most times have monarchs and monarchs and kings, and that presidents of republics are very odd beasts. And secondly is that I come from New Zealand, where the debate that Australia has always had over republicanism has always seemed rather strange and frankly frightening, slightly embarrassing. It's pretty clear that New Zealand, of course, is not just a place where British cars go to die, where films celebrating the special culture of the 1950s, come on down, Lord of the Rings, none, where they are recycled. It's also the last home of the British monarchy. Well, in case when it all goes wrong and Britain throws you out and Australia and Canada doesn't want you, there'll always be a home in Palmerston North or Invercargill you can call. New Zealand is so instinctively loyal, but no matter what Britain does to it, it still stays loyal to its monarchy. And indeed, one of the most classic, and I think one of the especially instructive episodes in New Zealand history, came 2 days after New Zealand had declared war on Germany on 5th of September 1939. I think actually they declared war on the 3rd of September, and with the time zones it means that actually New Zealand had declared war before Britain had, which would have been a problem if Britain had stopped New Zealand was up against a mindful law. Which I think actually isn't a true story, but when has the historian ever let facts get in the way of a good story? But Michael Joseph Savage, the Australian-born Labour leader and a beloved Prime Minister, said in a faltering voice on the 5th of September 1939 that we in New Zealand range ourselves without fear besides Britain. Where she goes, we go. Where she stands, we stand. We are only a small and young nation, but we are one and all, a band of brothers, and we march forward with union of hearts and wills to a common destiny. That's the type of monarchical attitude that New Zealand still has. So, in short, as a New Zealander, as an historian of empire and monarchy, I don't have a dog in this fight, as Lyndon Johnson was likely to say. But I think I represent the views of a lot more Australians than the rest of the speakers here tonight. In other words, I'm apathetic and slightly conservative. That's what John Howard relied on. We don't really care to change a system of government we don't think about very much, and we fear that any change will just make things worse. So I represent that apathetic voice. But I'm not entirely a conservative given to reactionary. My argument tonight is as follows. I want to say it now in case I go past my 6-minute or 8-minute time limit. I think we should keep the monarchy because the alternative is both very boring and likely not to offer the sort of democratic alternatives that monarchy offers. But I think it's time for the Hanoverians to leave the stage. They've had 300 years. It's time for another family to take over. Let Elizabeth finish her reign, of course. We have to let Charles become king, because it would be really mean. Someone in the 70s had prepared his whole life and he said, oh, he can't be king now. It would be terrible. But when Charles dies, let's do the proper Australian thing and auction off the monarchy. See how much money we can get for it. That's the Australian way. And I think we should bring back the long discarded idea of a royal progress, where a monarch comes to some place and says, please pay for me for a few months. That would be a great idea. So yes to the monarchy, no to Hanoverians, and let's have an X-Factor competition with our favourite billionaires, Prince Rupert, King Clive, Queen Gina. Let's see who's the best king or queen in Australia. So why should we keep the monarchy? Let's see what we can do here. What's going to give us the most fun? Let's take the Herald Sun view of it. Which one is going to be more fun? A merry monarch or a boring president? Well, it will be the monarchy, because what will we do if we have a president? We will, because Tony won't let us elect a president, we'll appoint someone. And who do we appoint? We appoint the most boring people imaginable. Judges and lawyers, for God's sake. Heads of the armed forces, even though Australia keeps on losing battles, we keep on thinking they're wonderful. Archbishops, and none of us go to church anymore. They are the type of boring people we appoint. So Peter Grosgrove, I looked up his Wikipedia entry, and it's just achievement and distinguishment after. He's nothing boring and disrespectable, nothing disrespectable about them at all. Quentin Bryce, another wonderful and witty and talented and great woman. And she does have a daughter having an affair with a married man. That's the sort of thing we expect from royals. But that was Bill Shorten. I mean, really. Would Diana go for Bill Shorten? No, not in a million years. We need someone much more exciting than this. And I think, to be slightly serious, the monarchy actually offers us a more democratic way of having leaders. The hereditary way of electing leaders is a bit like a lucky dip. Who do we get? And think of what we've got at the moment. Take the leaders of our current, the leaders we currently have, the politicians, the prime ministers of Australia, Britain, New Zealand and Canada. Line them up together and all the same. Middle-aged men wearing suits and boring ties, with money and the same neoliberal principles. Dull, dull, dull. Whereas for the monarchy, you get a lucky dip. You might get people you think are going to be really great, like Edward VIII, trained to be king, then is a disaster, and creates the only race riot in Bermuda in its whole history. Or you might have someone that you would never dream of picking, like Elizabeth I, whose father killed his mother, came from a especially dysfunctional family. She turned out great. Or Elizabeth II. The daughter of a second son, never likely to become queen, uneducated, appointed at 26 as queen. Where in a million years will someone in 1952 have appointed someone like that? And she's turned out wonderfully. Whenever Tony or Dave get sort of frisky, she says, well, Winston or Robert Menzies, my first prime ministers, wouldn't have said such a thing. But I do think it's time for them to leave the stage, the Hanoverians. They've achieved all they wanted to. They've got rich, which was their main ambition. They've started to change the rules. They're allowing girls to inherit first before boys. They'll soon allow themselves to marry Catholics, and the sole reason they're kings is because we passed over 56 Catholics to come to them in 1714. So it's time for them to go. And I think we could take the proper way and then auction the monarchy off. That's the right way to do it in neoliberal Australia. Do just as we did with Qantas and Telstra and see how much money you could get for it. I reckon about $1 billion would be about right. We could have it televised and see if Clive or Gina or someone like that could do it. Of course, we'll never pack it. There's some limits to how far we can go. But we could get a much better and more interesting monarch. Look, if we choose Gina Reinhardt, we would not only have a great queen, someone who did, like the present monarchy, doesn't like paying taxes, but we also get someone who hates her children. Just in a traditional Hanoverian, it would be a wonderful thing to do. The other thing I would do, just in the final minute, is to say that we should also reinstate the idea of a royal progress that Elizabeth did back in the 16th century. And that's when the Queen says, I want to come and stay for you. It's a huge honour, but you have to pay for it. You get basically bankrupted. And you can also do things like have some organ estate, like a tax office or something, that you have to support while the King is staying with you for the summer. So the monarchy could be greatly reformed in a variety of ways. We can make the monarchy pay, we can satisfy the social ambitions of our people, and we could bankrupt rich people, thus reducing the inequality that so mars our society. So let's keep the monarchy, but let's adapt it to the demands of modern Australia. Let's make the monarchy pay, let's sweat our asset. Thanks.
In answer to your question, Trevor, yes, it was the aptly named subject, Age of Empire, that brought you to mind. So our final speaker for the Republic is Professor Geoff Gallop. In addition to being Professor in the School of Government at Sydney University with a background in political theory and the history of radical political thought, Geoff was also Premier of Western Australia from 2001 to 2006, I believe. An ardent and veteran campaigner for the Australian Republic, taking a leading role in the 1998 Constitutional Convention, he is now Chairman of the ARM. We're very fortunate to have him here tonight, so please make him welcome. In addition, we'll now have 10 minutes for our final two illustrious speakers with not have actions. Just give you an extra chance to make your mind up on the map. So please make Geoff.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, young and old, I think some born in Australia, some born overseas and with us, some religious, some non-religious, some even Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australian citizens all. We're focused tonight on a fundamental characteristic of our political system. Who is the head of state? What does the head of state represent in terms of our society? What do we say about ourselves through the institution of a head of state? So I'm going to shift the debate over towards not just the political system, but the culture that underpins the political system. And my theme is national pride. And I'm interested in what creates national pride, and very importantly, what sustains it. What makes it endure? What makes it a strong feature of our society? Now, to answer that question, what I'm going to do is to look at a few incidents or moments of Australian history about which we are, I believe, and which we should be proud. Let's start in the 1850s, back in New South Wales, when William Wentworth came up with a proposal to establish a titled aristocracy in Australia. Daniel Dennett, he called it the Bunyip aristocracy. It was rejected. The Australian people at that time, working in the colony of New South Wales, determined decisively we were not going to have an aristocracy in our country, and we didn't have one. I'm very proud of that very important event back in the 1850s. We could go to the 1890s when we drafted our Constitution. We should be very proud of our Constitution. And why? Because it was an act of creation. The constitutional founders didn't say, look, everything in Britain is perfect. The British parliamentary system is the best system that's ever been invented. They added to the system the US model of federalism, constitutional rule, and then Just to wrap it all up nicely, they brought in the Swiss referendum so that the constitution could only be changed by a vote of the people. An act of creation. The Australian people said, what is our issue? How do we solve it? Yes, Britain can help us through the traditions that they've developed, but we need to look wider. We need to look wider for what it is that would make our system work best. We could go to the 1930s, when the then Prime Minister, Scalmer, held his ground on a fundamental question. Who was going to appoint the Governor-General of Australia? And of course, the British establishment, King George, Australian Conservatives pilloried him. He stood his ground. And what was he doing? He was standing his ground on behalf of Australia and its people. Who should determine who the Governor-General was? And indeed, Isaacs became our Governor-General. We could go to the 1980s, when the Commonwealth and the States, Liberal Coalition and Labor, negotiated the Australia Act of 1986, which eliminated the remaining possibilities for the United Kingdom to legislate with effect in Australia, for the United Kingdom to be involved in Australian government, as they had been as late as the 1970s, when Neville Wran wanted to remove appeals to the Privy Council and make it very clear that he was the elected Premier of New South Wales. Great resistance from the British establishment, and finally, as a result of those sorts of developments, the Australian people, through their representatives, Liberal and Labor, got together and negotiated that legal freedom, which meant an end to all appeals from any Australian court to a British court. We could go to the 1970s and 1980s when we developed our own national anthem. We could go to the Australian system of honours, based upon democratic process, proper selection, merit-based principles, not just a Prime Minister saying who it should be and the Queen clicking off on it, a proper process. We could go to the Citizenship Pledge. Let me read the Citizenship Pledge that new Australians take. I've been to so many citizenship ceremonies. This is brilliant. I pledge my loyalty to Australia and its people, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey. We are rightfully proud of all of those moments. No aristocracy in Australia. Our own system that involved federalism, judicial review and a referendum. We appoint the governors and the Governor-Generals in our country. It's our national anthem. It's our oath of allegiance. It's our system of honours. We're proud of those moments. Why? Because they demonstrate something. Our commitment to popular sovereignty. It sets down our values, meritocracy over aristocracy, equality over hierarchy, and independence over dependence. But there it is. At the peak of our system, we still have the Queen and, of course, her heirs and successors. She resides in Britain. Occasionally visits, but she resides in Britain. She's essentially a British monarch. I know she's the Queen of Australia, theoretically a separate function, but make no mistake, she's English through and through. She's necessarily Anglican. Might change, Trevor. Hasn't changed yet. She's chosen by way of hereditary succession. Well, is this really what we need in Australia today? A non-resident, necessarily Anglican, and chosen by way of hereditary succession. What about Australian citizenship? What about multiculturalism? What about equal opportunity? Why worry, say some of the monarchists? Why worry? After all, most of her powers and responsibilities are in the hands of our Governor and our Governor-General. And in all other matters, we can legislate for rights and responsibilities as we wish through our parliamentary representatives. Well, if such things don't matter, why persist with a system that contradicts so much that we believe in? It frames our thinking. You know, there's a little bit of British aristocracy still within the minds of a part of our society. It's still there, lurking around, influencing attitudes, influencing the way we look at things. And the way we look at things should be embodied in our principles, in our symbols, and in our system. It's a way of thinking for another place and another time, and it's inappropriate. That's why we developed our national anthem. God Save the Queen was inappropriate. That's why we developed our system of Australian honours. It was inappropriate to have a system of knights and dames. That's why we developed our own pledge to Australia and its people and its democratic system. That's why we did it, because the previous system was inappropriate. But of course, such things do matter to monarchists, and Daniel made the point in a very eloquent way. He believes in it. He believes in it. He doesn't think that the people, Australians included, have the wit or wisdom to produce a republic that would be better. He said so. We can't produce something better, he said. They're locked into the crown as the only way to bring balance to an unruly world. What's at stake here is the opportunity cost of what we've got. One of us, appointed or elected as head of state, with powers and responsibilities consistent with the role we expect. And what a process it would be, as Sean said, to create that alternative model. What a process. We got it wrong in the 1990s, but next time round it'll be a better process. When it happens, it will be another one of those moments of pride. But along with what we hope will be Indigenous recognition in the Constitution, will mean even more than that which we have achieved thus far. That will be the day that we create our truly national day, when we appropriate our whole system back to ourselves and have our own head of state appointed or elected by our own processes. Ladies and gentlemen, ignore the distractions thrown up by the monarchists. Ignore them. National self-respect, national independence at the heart of the matter. And when the deed is done, we'll wonder why we didn't do it much sooner. Thank you very much.
Right. Our final speaker for the monarchists is Professor David Flint AM, an emeritus professor of law and an expert on the Australian Constitution and on international law. David has also served as the head of the Australian Press Council and the Australian Broadcasting Authority. He is one of our most prominent constitutional monarchists and has been national convener of Australia's constitutional monarchy since 1998, as well as authoring several books on the referendum debate and the virtues of our constitutional monarchical arrangement. So as one of the leading voices for the monarchy back in 1999, we're privileged to have him here tonight. So please welcome David.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, last year I went to the farewell tour of a great Australian at the Capitol Theatre in Sydney. And as the curtain went up, they announced that Dame Edna Everage would like to honour the traditional owners, the Reinhardt family. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to honour the man who founded this country, Captain Arthur Phillip, whose disappearance from the world 200 years ago was barely noticed in Australia a month or so ago. Because he brought to this country the fundamental institutions which have made us what we are. He brought to us the rule of law, he brought the English language, he brought our Judeo-Christian institutions, and above all, he brought a fundamental institution which provides leadership above politics. This was soon followed, ladies and gentlemen, this was soon followed by the British giving us, before the Eureka Stockade, self-government under the Crown, self-government under the Westminster system. And within a very short period of time, we had agreed among ourselves to unite in an indissoluble federal commonwealth under the Crown. An indissoluble federal commonwealth under the Crown. As Michael Kirby says it is, a crowned republic. To the extent this question is odious, we already have a republic. We don't have a politician's republic, we have a crowned republic. Now, under our constitution, anyone can propose change, and that change can occur. But the onus is on those who propose change, to propose benefits. It has to be beneficial overwhelmingly beneficial. We've had 5 principal movements to remove the crown. I don't say to become a republic because we're already a republic. To remove the crown from our system. The first was at the time of the gold rush. And the proposed benefit from that was to take us outside of the then empire so that we would have our own immigration policy, so that we could establish an imitation of the apartheid republics of the United States. The second was even more sinister, and that followed the First World War, when there was a major movement in Australia to bring Australia under foreign domination. They dominated Australia, or at least the industrial unions of Australia, they dominated the ACTU at the end of the war. They undermined the war effort. And what they proposed was that Australia, the benefit they proposed for Australia was a communist utopia. That is, that we would become like the People's Republic of Eastern Europe or the Soviet Republic. Obviously not a great benefit for us. The next great movement to remove the crown was principally brought by 2 very capable, very ambitious men, Paul Keating and Malcolm Turnbull. And their proposal was to establish a republic, a politician's republic, which would provide certain benefits for the people. And numerous spokespersons for the Republicans came forward and said, well, this will increase immigration, this will improve trade, this will lower unemployment. Al Grasby and Neville Wran were very good at this. They argued that this would liberate artists and it would liven spirits. Eventually they realized that this was all complete rubbish. Nobody was taking any notice of this. So they found a term which was so obscure, a term of diplomacy which was so obscure, it wasn't even in the Macquarie Dictionary of the day. That is the term head of state. Most people, apart from diplomats and international lawyers, had never heard of it. And they said, we've got to have an Australian head of state. The only way we can have that is by becoming a republic. And any international lawyer could have told them, and diplomats tell them, and the Keating government, and the Hawke government, and the Rudd government exercised that. They sent the Governor-General overseas to represent Australia, where they were sent as the head of state and received as the head of state. We already had an Australian head of state. But this was the only benefit that could be argued in 1999. It appears 9 times in the yes-no booklet. We put it in once, we said we've already got an Australian head of state. And that, as you know, was not successful. It wasn't successful because in taking away the crown, they didn't substitute a check and balance. The president was an unusual position because it would have been the only republic in world history in which the Prime Minister could have sacked the president more easily than his cook. He could have sacked the president without grounds, without any notice, and without any right of appeal. It was turned the president into a poodle of the Prime Minister. It would have ensured that nothing like 1975 or the frequent acts of governors general in bringing governments up to heel could no longer occur. It would have expanded the power of the political class, and that was what was wrong with it, and that was rejected by the Australian people. Well, what have we got now? We have 2 movements. We have one which Bob Carr said he had to change Australian foreign policy. He had to change Australian foreign policy because he couldn't explain an aspect of Australian foreign policy from the steps of the Lakemba Mosque. That is the movement, of course, to put Australia under caliphate, under Sharia law. We'll put that aside. The other movement is that of the Australian Republican movement. The Australian Republican movement in 1999 announced that whatever the result, they would wind up. Well, they didn't wind up. But what they've come up with is not a model of republic. They've come up with a process. Instead of saying, this is the republic, these are the changes we propose, we've got a process, and the process is a favourite process in the French Revolution and by the two Napoleons in exercising authoritarian rule, that is, the blank cheque plebiscite. Instead of the Swiss referendum, which we have, where you have all the details on the table, instead you have the blank cheque and you fill that in, you say yes to it or no to it, and that's it. Of course they can't, because they know that in Australia we still have to have a referendum, but they're hoping that the people will feel locked in morally by the plebiscite. But there's no thought of a plebiscite at the moment. The problem with this is this. It's as if the Australian Republican movement were marching down Bourke Street in Melbourne saying, we want a republic, we want a republic. But we haven't the foggiest idea what sort of republic we want. And that's the situation now. The important thing in all of this is that the benefit be established. Why haven't the Republicans looked at the two republics? The oldest 7 democracies in the world are 2 republics and 5 constitutional monarchies, of which Elizabeth is head of 4. Why don't they look at the 2 republics, Switzerland and the United States, where there are checks and balances on power? The 2 big problems of the Australian Constitution are firstly the excessive centralisation of power in Canberra by delinquent politicians and by activist judges. The second is the way in which the power brokers have taken control of the diminished political parties, so much so that your candidates are more often than not chosen, not because they're the best candidates, they're chosen because of their loyalty to a particular power broker. A republic, any constitutional change, should deal with those 2 major issues. It shouldn't talk about a process. That's what the Republicans have to do. That's their duty. Both of those, incidentally, can be cured without in any way removing the Crown, which is such a safe and sound institution. Thank you.
I will be mercifully brief. Everyone, I just wanted to quickly thank all of our speakers for their brilliant insight, and thank you very much to those who have flown down for this. It was very much appreciated, and it's really certainly made anyone in the club and anyone interested really made the evening. So thank you very much. I've got a bottle of wine for you all. I hope you drink, as I do after this debate. So thank you very much, and thank you for all attending.